things that I want to start off with right away is to let everyone know that we are in the presence of greatness. Kamila is the first Black board chair of the CFP board, and I think that deserves a round of applause. And we also have Dr. Rene Baker here as well from Raymond James. But here's what's important about, yes, clap it up as well. Here's why this is such a poignant moment. My niece, who works with me, is 27 years old and now has a reflection of possibility. And when I came into this industry, I didn't have that. I walked into Merrill Lynch, completely financially illiterate, and I didn't have an example. There was nothing tangible for me to touch or feel or ask questions to. So the very importance of this moment right now is the visual. I say this about the financial services industry all the time. Our visuals are abhorrent. If we change what little girls and boys can see, they would know that this is a possibility for them. But they got to see it. If I see it, I can be it. It could be in my mind's eye. So with that, I think one of the things that we want to do is, first of all, we want to leave here to make sure we deposit something in your spirit that you walk away and now you feel compelled to talk about and effectively make the change that we all chatter about, but what makes this possible. So with that, I do want to kick it to Rene, who works in diversity and equity and inclusion at Raymond James. And again, to make this point, outside of HR, working for the advisors to help them build their businesses in an inclusive way. Before we get to that, I will say this. I personally believe that our industry has failed at diversity and inclusion. We need to admit it. No one ever defined diverse, and what in the world is inclusive? What does it mean to be inclusive? We need to move to a more representative and equitable industry. Everyone represented, everyone gets an equitable shot. May the best person win. And if you want meritocracy to win after that, great. Pink hair, long hair, short hair, black, tall, skinny, shouldn't matter. Everyone should come here and feel included. So with that, I will kick it to you about where we stand right now from your lens and where you work.
Thank you, Tyrone, and I'll take that. And I think that, shout out to everyone, especially my folks here that are representing every day at Raymond James. And what I think is really important is the fact of that see it, be it. And we were having this conversation that when I started in the industry many years ago, I did not see a lot of people that looked like me. I did not have those individuals who had showed up and said that this is a possibility, whether it was working in finance, I majored in finance undergrad, or whether it was about this whole concept of what it means to build wealth. And in today's market, where we are today, having these conversations and that shifting demographic and the conversations that are taking place, I think there's no better time than now to be able to start to break and disrupt the status quo of what it means to be in this industry. And as we're having this conversation at this event, and at an event that is also disrupting what it means to be at an event, I think there's no better time to that. And one thing that I'll say really quickly, when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think what's critical is the part of belonging. We all belong here for some reason. And when we start thinking about how we're showing up in our organizations, whether you run your own RIA, whether you have your own business, or whether you work within a corporation, that belonging piece, I belong where I am, and your clients belong there, and we all have the opportunity and the ability to build wealth and to show up in this industry to help to change the demographic for the future. So I know we'll get into that conversation, but this is not about a DEI conversation. This is about a us conversation, and we all belong to be a part of it and contribute to it.
That, ladies and gentlemen, is your first free jewelry moment right there. So, Kamila, going to you, it's funny, I'm looking at this, and it's behind us. The changing faces of wealth. I know I don't come from wealth. I know we had a conversation, you didn't either. Mm-hmm. So that juxtaposition is very important as I kick it to you and talk about your experiences about where you sit right now. But we were talking yesterday about you starting your own firm and your background and the importance of culture and understanding where people come from. So lean on that a little bit to piggyback on what Rene was saying.
My family's from Georgia. They were sharecroppers. moved to Philadelphia. My mom never had a financial advisor. My grandparents never had a financial advisor. I'm from a single parent household in Philadelphia. Tyrone, I didn't even know what a mutual fund was until I got to college. No one talked about mutual funds investing. That was not in my high school curriculum. And not till I worked part-time as a bank teller in college. And I was like, what do they do over there? Tell me, what are those guys in the back, who were all men, of course, like, what are they doing? People are sharing portfolios. And that's when I first got my entry into this profession. And my experience, probably like many of you who are underrepresented in your respective profession, I was the only black female in my new hire class when I started at Vanguard. My last corporate job before I left and started and became an RIA, I was the only female on my team.
Right.
And only black person on my team. And this was 2019. And so, to your point, we have failed a lot of individuals looking for entry into this profession. And I think what we don't realize is it impacts access, right? If you don't see anyone who looks like you in this profession, if you don't feel that you can be comfortable talking about your goals and your fears and your plans, how can we make this open and welcome? One thing we discussed earlier is something that everyone can work with everyone, but there's something called cultural competence, right? That you have to know someone's culture, right? I come from a culture where most black households are not as trusting of financial professionals, right? So I have to work a little bit harder to build that relationship. You have to explain a little bit more. There has to be a little bit more transparency because that level of trust has not been embedded and carried on through generations.
Yeah.
I even said to you guys yesterday that I have my first Asian client. And one of the things I did is, I'm not Asian, right? But I reached out to an Asian advisor and said, can you tell me about, how you think about investing in your culture? Yeah. And so for us to really move the needle, we have to have people who look like us, yep. More ethnically diverse individuals represented to provide that access to really good financial planning.
So many places to take it after that, and I just want to piggyback on that by pinging it to you. Again, I didn't know anything about finance until I was 25. And then I walked on Wall Street for my first job. I didn't know anything. And they were like, this is triage. We got to at least explain to him what the stock market is. He just walked by it, right? But also, I was told my name was too black. Can't pick up the phone and tell him your name is Tyrone. Say you're Tyler, right? I was a younger man then, so I moved the table shortly after you said that. But so many other different things along the way that kind of shaped my lens of an industry. That was like, it kind of seems like they don't want me here. Yeah. So that's that part. The other part is, I want to talk about something before we get into, again, just the sheer enormous amount of wealth that women, create and own and manage in this country, but still can't get quality advice. And we're going to lean in a little bit here. I'm leaving a dinner meeting in a hotel right before we sat down to talk about this panel. And there was a young white man, stopped me. I had a conversation with him a year and a half ago, don't even remember. And as he's talking to me, he said, you've changed my life. His girlfriend was there, she confirmed. She was like, he's all into all this crypto stuff now because of you and this, that, or whatever. And he goes, thank you so much for taking time with me. I was in a situation that was a little rough, and now I'm happier than I've ever been. I bring that up for this reason. For me, it was always the inverse. I had to beg for incredibly powerful white men to look my way. And if I knew I kept my head down and worked hard, they would maybe give me an opportunity. And I've been blessed for that. But why I bring that up is this. In that moment, I realized the shift of as more of us are in the position to give advice to folks who don't look, walk, talk, and act like us. Now it becomes something where it's a norm for people who look like us to give advice, to be right, to be educated. That's important, right? And before I left Merrill Lynch, there was a study that was absolutely astounding to me that showed they polled black investors, and they said that they would much rather work with a white advisor than a black one. And I remember I printed it out. I still don't have it, but that was only because the visual. Yes. If all I turn on, and this is what I see, those are the folks that are competent about this wealth thing, which we'll get into as well. So I wanted to bring those 2 points up, but pivoting very quickly because the other thing is this. one of the things that happens at wirehouses all the time, if you look at the retention rates, not good. But if an advisor is constantly talking to a particular individual in the household, and now you look at blended households now and how families are morphing and looking differently, if you cannot address all parties, now one individual passes away, God forbid, that money's leaving. You never spoke to me. You never looked my way.
That's right.
You didn't get a chance to understand me, and this happens to a lot of women. So I want to come back to you now on that. The sheer amount of wealth that I think folks don't understand that women control and will control, and especially black women,
Yes.
highly educated, create more businesses than anyone else, they're going to need advice, and they're going to want to look to someone like themselves to get it. So lean into that a little bit and talk about that from your lens.
Well, one of the things that I'll say is we already know that women and brown and black individuals have been poorly served in this industry. So let's change it, right? If you are sitting in this audience and you're missing out on having clients as women or having brown and black clients, that is on you. You have been served. You know what it is that you need to do. And what I'll say is the sheer number of women that are starting businesses, the sheer number of black and brown women, especially black women, that are starting businesses, it is shifting. What got us here is no longer going to keep us here. There is a tremendous amount of money that is transferring over the next 5 years. You talk about the client of tomorrow. Let's look around us and see the client of today. And I would say this, even if you look at, I know a lot of my friends that are advisors that are starting businesses, there is a tremendous amount of wealth and a tremendous opportunity. And the last thing that I'll say is, because I really know that we're going to shift this to more of a wealth dialogue, is this: before we get to the individuals that can talk about advice, we have to create, and it's my job, right? Create a pathway where black, brown women, all others, the others that haven't traditionally felt included, feel that they have a place. And finance is very complex. So let's start meeting people where they're at. Let's start having a human-to-human conversation with individuals. So that's another barrier to entry that we have. Because we're not going to come, and you don't go into communities and talk above them. Talk to them about the things that they matter so that they can find a place in this industry. And that is when we then open up the door for the dialogue to have conversations for advice.
Yeah, so one thing Tyrone mentioned is earlier this year, I started a firm with 3 other colleagues. We are 3 African-American female CFP professionals and 1 African-American man CFP professional. And this is surprising. I'm going to say this. We realized, I think last night it confirmed, there's 4 of us. We are the most number of black CFPs at one independent RIA, small RIA. 4 in the country. We asked around, we had a dialogue. Well, how many do you have? Oh, we have 2, we have 3. 4 is the most. And that number is surprisingly small for us to hold this position, and it's disappointing. And you ask, why did we start our own firm? And because all of us had been with the big firms. You know, my colleagues had been at U.S. Trust and Merrill Lynch and J.P. Morgan. And why did we decide to leave our corporate jobs and our great benefits and our 401k match to start our own firm? And it's because we wanted to serve clients how we wanted to serve them. Right? So one of the things that Rene and I have in common is we talk about the racial wealth gap, and that it's hard for someone who is 35 or 40 to come to me with $500,000 or $1 million. Most traditional firms would not accept clients whose assets were under that amount. But we know you're first-gen wealth. We know that with the right guidance and right support, and with people who understand the culture, and understand the difficulties you are going to have in attaining and retaining your wealth, we know we can help you. So we left our corporate comforts to start something because we wanted to provide access, but we also wanted to be really visible as well, that you can work with advisors that have a similar experience as you, right? We know the phone calls from cousins, can I borrow some money? We know that what it is oftentimes to be the most successful person in your family in terms of financially and the burden or the survivor's remorse it bears, right? We know that you're trying to be the first one to create generational wealth and the burden that sets, for you as an individual. And so I think we're trying to create an ecosystem ourselves as RIA owners and firms who have a commitment to equity to really close that gap and to hopefully have a more diverse future within this profession.
And can I add something to
You
that?
absolutely
Yes.
can.
Thank you, Tyrone. And there's so many different paths to do
Yes.
that. And so I have to call that out. There's just so many different paths to do it. And one of the opportunities that we have in this industry is to make sure that we're hearing from all the different perspectives so that when you do come into an organization, because how are we going to get more financial CFPs, how we're going to get more financial advisors if we as organizations, right, and that's part of my job, I have to make this more sense of belonging and inclusion. Because as a leader in an organization, and I'll say the views and opinions of what I'm about to say do not represent Raymond James.
Well played.
The thing that I think is most important is that you have to see it to be it. Mm-hmm. And you need individuals who can come in, who understand the cultural competence of those individuals, and maybe start knocking down some of those barriers to entry to even get into the field in the first place, so that we can help to sustain them and support them over time. More women, more diversity, more in different backgrounds. So that's what I wanted, I think, to say. Thank you.
Free jewelry
and
moment.
Everyone who is out here who is helping to create these initiatives, this is what's going to help us shift that demographic. We need people who look like other people to be able to service them in the future.
Yep. So leaning in more here, I see Marcy out there. I had the pleasure of interviewing Marcy as part of the Human Advisor podcast. I would encourage everyone, one, do not leave here without having a conversation with her, but look at that episode. And to expand the reach, right, when we talk about equity and inclusion and culture, so I grew up in a Pentecostal home, right, and you talk about being the most successful one in the family. I'm still trying to match Jesus to my mother's eyes. It's not going to happen. Not going to happen. Look, Mama, I made it. No, you didn't. You didn't walk on water. Sorry, son. But my sister is a married lesbian, right? It was a difficult thing for our family, but also, again, folks that are LGBTQIA, people who looking for any type of hope, they all have the same issues. I have to get by the day to day. But we had a conversation that I thought was incredibly important, because every advisor in here is going to face the day when someone walks into your office that you have literally no familiarity with. And she spoke about helping folks transition and the cost to that. And being able to understand that I made a personal decision of whatever it is I want to be in my heart. That is up to me, not you. Your goal is to give me advice. The comfort that you provide. The term wealth is inherently exclusive. Mm-hmm. It's not inclusive. The marketing side of it, right? I always say this, certified pre-owned, used car. Certified pre-owned sounds so much better, don't it? The language that we use. She corrected me during the interview to use proper terms. Didn't get offended. I needed to know the terms that she used versus the terms that I thought I needed to use. You have to be open to that. No one has all the answers, right? So I think as the folks who need advice from us change, literally, or they are people who we don't identify with because of religion or background or region, none of that matters.
Yeah, so I'll share this with you. So one of my mentors I had is Brent Kessel. And he was the former CEO of Abacus. And actually, we wrote a white paper together. But let me tell you how it started. We were talking, and I was like a brand new advisor, just maybe 6 months out of corporate, and he was giving me some guidance. And he had a Black client, and we were talking about tithing, right? So I mentioned my family's from Augusta, Georgia. And he said, well, Kamila, they're not saving, but they're tithing. And I was like, Brent, hold on.
Don't rob
pause,
God.
Right?
Rob God.
Let's
Don't
talk
do it.
about this, right?
Don't
Because
do
it
it.
was the
10%.
cultural competence. I grew up in a Baptist household. I knew if an advisor walked into that office and told that family, stop tithing and increase your 401k contribution, what was going to happen? We all know the answer was no, I'm leaving, I'm not coming back in this office ever again, right? So it was me, it's a learning journey, Tyrone, right?
That's
and so
it.
me and him, we talked about the culture and how important philanthropy is and giving is to Black households. And if you're gonna have advisors at your firm give advice to Black households, they have to understand, what does tithing mean to them? How does it relate to their faith? How does it relate to their community, right? It really is, it's not just giving, but it's a community support. Yeah. So to your point, if you're going to work with different households, if you're going to expand your reach, if you're going to follow the demographics and how they're moving right now in the U.S., you need to understand these cultures. You need to understand the Hispanic culture as well. You need to understand the Asian culture. Because to your point, what made you successful the past 50 years will not what make you successful the next 50 years.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the changing face of this profession, the changing face of this wealth, you have to really become a student. Right? And one thing I always tell people who want to be a financial advisor, it's like you always have to have intellectual curiosity.
That's right.
It can never stop. Your learning and your desire to learn more will never stop. And so that doesn't just end with understanding new ETFs or new products or crypto or NFTs, but it also continues the spectrum of understanding cultures as well.
For the record, she brought up crypto, I didn't.
Yeah.
Get that on the Twitters. So really quickly, wasn't me.
I did.
CFP too, by the way. Definitely want to take this question. Whew, thank you, Jesus. All right. So the question here, as a white advisor, how can I best start to develop a more diverse client base? Great question, but I want to say this. Let's take that out. I want to focus on the white and the diverse here. Just as an advisor, how do you start a more diverse client base, I believe, and I want to get your opinion on this as well. I think define diversity for yourself. If the industry wasn't defined it, hint, they don't want to define it. What does diverse mean to you? And what that may mean working with families that have special needs. That could be folks that are, again, transitioning. It could be athletes. It could be, if you're working with retirees and you start working with NFL players, it's diverse. Yeah. So you need to define what that looks like. So I think the definition is important. And I think the other thing, I think we also need to recognize the industry, and I don't have any problem speaking hard truths. I think if we look at it where most of the power and wealth is concentrated, and those who make the decision makers, they're white. Great. We need to just, all right, let's get over that. But now being willing to do this, sit and have a conversation and come to the table on one side. And then those of us that are vanguards and leaders to speak on behalf of this, is to take the time to listen. And it's not, and we also don't feel like it's our responsibility to educate every single person either, right? You got to do some of this on your own. But lean on those who are in your network. I say this to folks all the time. How many times do you go out with people who don't look like you? That you call friends, that you break bread with? My network is not your network. When you start to open up your network in here, talking to people that, again, are from different areas of the country, of different backgrounds, then their network becomes your network. That's incredibly important. So I want to get your perspective on that as well, as I'm sure you deal with a lot of white advisors, and they want to get more diverse. What is your answer to that?
So I say money is green, right? So if you want to make money, then you're going to look at, I do like what you said, Tyrone, around the fact that look at the diversity of what diversity is to you. But I'm always going to say, look, money is green. That's what I learned when I started on Wall Street over 20 plus years ago. And how do I get access to it? So one of the things that we do, right, at Raymond James, I work and I support multiple advisor inclusion. We like inclusion. Inclusion is my middle name here. Right. And we say, okay, how do you want to learn? Can you learn about women advisors, black advisors, pride advisors, and veteran advisors, and beyond? And the first thing goes to what the conversation earlier around education, asking the questions, being involved in the different community aspects. But you can't get close to something if you don't ask the questions. But what I hear from those that are not included in those certain networks is I might feel uncomfortable, I might say the wrong thing, and give yourself grace and understand that you can go into a conversation and say, I might, like what you said with Marcy, yep. I might not say this right, but could you please educate me? I've done some research, but I might need some education. And that is a conversation that we have around when you want to have diverse client bases, you just have to show up in diverse spaces. But also make sure that when you have a conversation, if you're talking to a group of women advisors, you want to say, not his advisor. Won't you say, as an advisor or their advisor? We want to make sure that the people that you want to attract actually feel included when you have a conversation. Because if you don't make them feel included, they're going to go say bye-bye, and then you never know if that's going to be the interaction that's going to prevent that person from going back to take an advisor. Because how many of us are judgmental because of our first interaction with someone or something, especially if you don't have trust? So not a specific, very tactical thing. Just do better and have different conversations, ask your questions, and lean into those communities that you like to see more represented in your practice.
So one of the things I remember after George Floyd, and it was COVID-19, and there was a lot of discussion about racial equity, right? Moving past the issues with police brutality and things that were happening, and people were assessing their networks. Am I the only one who remembers that happening, right? People were saying, tell us about your network. Is your network homogeneous in nature, right? Like one of the things I never realized, like I have some friends in HR, and they said the worst way to increase your diversity at your firm is to rely on your referral program.
Yes.
Because if your employees are already homogeneous, more than likely, their friends and their circle are the same, and you'll get the same people at your firm over and over again. What you need to do is take an assessment and say, we discussed it before, like, what does my friend group look like?
Yep.
Right? What does my vendor relationship look like? Who do I work with? Who's my doctor? Who's my attorney? Who's my CPA? Assess your community, right? Because if your community is homogeneous in nature, how are you going to be able to expand your thinking, right? How will you even have the opportunity to have critical conversations and be able to learn? So I always say it starts with you, right? Not say like, oh, I need a black friend or Hispanic friend, but perhaps it's going out of your community, volunteering, right? Pushing yourself to expand from your bubble. And that was one of the great ways to increase your awareness and increase your learnings of what equity really looks like.
Yeah. Get uncomfortable.
And uncomfortable,
yeah.
Yes.
So we have 6 minutes or so here. I'm a fierce advocate for the underserved. Again, I want to say this as well. Again, certified pre-owned used car. The term unbanked and underbanked is very undermining. And I'll tell a quick story about that, right? I grew up in an underbanked home. I was first in my family to finish high school. And I remember sitting with my mother and having a conversation. Mommy, I'm a fierce warrior for the unbanked. She looking at me like, what is that? Explain to me what that means. And she was like, your father and I don't even, she was like, it was more like we were just underserved. We couldn't do anything. So I stopped using that term. But what I would hope is that the main way that our industry could get more diverse is that we bring more people who need financial advice to it. Who cares what they look like? 2/3 of the people in this country do not have college degree. Almost 25% of African Americans are what the Fed terms unbanked or underbanked. Folks in rural communities, there's banking deserts in the United States of America. So I think for me, to get our industry more diverse and inclusive, I think the minute we start getting away from pushing wealth to the people that have it from one side of the room to the other and being proximate, as you were talking about, and getting into the communities when we come to these conferences, there should be a day where there's pro bono planning for the local community to come in and be able to sit with you and to meet you and to meet Marcy one day.
But you know,
And
the-
Karen.
And a free
Karen.
smoothie.
But you know what the term, I stopped using underserved for that very reason, Tyrone. We've moved to resilient communities,
I love that.
right?
I love
Because
that.
these are individuals, to your point, that have had significant impediments to building wealth.
Yep.
And we do see progress being made in certain areas,
Yep.
but they're very resilient,
Yep.
right? It isn't like they don't want financial advice.
Yep.
They're the ones who are trying to find it and make a way on their own.
Dignity.
With dignity.
Yep.
So that's one thing we talk about is how do we work with resilient communities to help them build wealth, right? How do we meet them where they are?
Yeah.
And also, we talked about this earlier, is from a financial planning perspective, how are we a little bit more creative in how we offer financial planning,
Talk
right?
about
How
it.
do we remove the assets under management model, right? Because if someone has $10,000, it's not feasible for a financial advisor to work with that person with assets under management.
Call it what it is, exclusive. That's an exclusive model.
It's an exclusive model, right?
Okay.
So one of the things we see happening are like subscription models, right? One of the things is hourly planning. But because we know that there's an importance of having a person working with you. We can't rely solely on technology. Technology can support and scale, but we do know that for most of the critical conversations that people have during life events, a person is someone who can help nurture that and make sure they stay down that right path. But how can we do that in a way? How can our profession think about different service models to reach those individuals in a meaningful way?
All right, so I
like
want to come
that.
to you on this. There's a question here. How should advisors change the messaging of their marketing to be less exclusionary for clients? And how can we balance this versus niching down? By the way, niche when you're looking for it, niche when you find it. Niching down. So,
Well,
What say
I
you?
like, yeah. So I would say, here's one thing that I'll see, and this is just maybe it's a little bit of a rant, but with value. How often does your website reflect the diversity all over your website and all over your marketing
Free
materials? And then that is not definitely representative of your client base. I think using those images, right, and having that conversation, and everyone back in 2020 went through this rehaul of their website to make them more diverse. And I'd say the first step is to make sure, be who you are, be you. And if that's your client base is not reflective of this diversity, you shouldn't maybe have that on your website. So I know that that gets away from that messaging, but maybe it's not about the messaging as much as it is the value that you provide in the communities. Maybe it's not about looking the part, but
Alright,
being
give
the
it up
part.
for that.
Maybe it's about not necessarily saying that I'm looking to have a diverse market and I'm looking to bring more, but more about I'm looking to bring people in, so I'm going to go into those communities. I love marketing. I think that there's so much value in it, but to the point that we've been having about meeting people where they're at and being authentic and being intentional around your efforts, I think that's important. And get your words right. I said earlier, I can't tell you how many times I'm in a conversation and I support women. I have a group of really badass women advisors at Raymond James, and oftentimes I hear people say, him, him, him. No, these are all her, and some of them are they. But really understand the language in the communities, that cultural competence, that's so important. So I'd say you need to balance that by making sure you're authentic, because people are dealing with money and nothing is more important to them than having an authentic human dealing with their money that gets what's important to them.
all right, so for those keeping score at home, crypto, and you swore, I think.
I did, I
Yeah.
said
Okay.
ass.
But one of the things too in terms of how does your site look, the younger generations do not notice diversity. They notice the absence of diversity. Right? So if your team picture, to your point,
Right.
if your entire team all looks the same, that to them is striking. They don't say, oh, wow, I see there's a Hispanic person, an Asian person, a black person. That's now the expectation.
That's right.
If you're
Yeah.
not meeting that expectation, then now you appear exclusionary. So just your marketing material, your pictures on your website,
Images.
your team pictures. I always look, when I'm looking to work with a potential vendor, I look at their leadership
Yeah.
and I scroll. And I'm like, no one there looks like me. So how are you going to help me reach my goals?
We're racing to the end here. We got 20 seconds. We're going to take some of Bob Pisani's time.
But that's a
he went
good
over.
point. I just wanted to say that's a
go
good
ahead.
point.
Yeah.
And the views and opinions that I said with my earlier word does not reflect my organization.
So really quickly, I want to finish on this. I think the slide is going to come up. Niall, you promised me, or some of the folks here promised that the slide will come up. We were at a local foster home yesterday. This foster home does incredible work with children, helping them get on their feet, mental health, feeding them, and everything else. It's not going to come up, but whatever. We're going to make sure that you get it. And would encourage everyone to donate. They need supplies. They have $1 million budget per year. But I think if there's anything that our industry should do, it is make sure that we are extending our hand to give and not take. Appreciate you all. Thank you for the time.